Kiraveth stood before the observation window and watched the jungle moon turn slowly beneath the station. Vareth 7 was beautiful in a terrible way. Green and blue clouds swirled over endless forests that had never known the touch of civilization. Rivers cut through the land like silver threads. Mountains rose from the green carpet like the bones of some ancient giant god. It was also one of the most dangerous places in the known galaxy that the Galactic Union had marked this moon with a red classification almost 300 years ago. No colonies, no settlements, no landing without special permission. The creatures that lived in those forests had evolved to kill with terrible efficiency. Survey teams had tried to study the moon before. Most of them had not come back. Kiraveth touched the glass with her long, scaled fingers. Her people, the Silurians, were not built for places like Vareth 7. They had evolved on a world of eternal twilight, where the light was soft and the dangers were few. They had become scholars and diplomats, artists and scientists. They had not fought a war in 10,000 years. Violence was something they read about in history files, not something they experienced. This made her the perfect choice for a survey mission. She was young, ambitious, and eager to prove herself. She had studied the ecosystems of 100 worlds from the safety of orbital stations and research vessels. She had written papers that were respected throughout the academic community. She had never set foot on an uncontrolled world in her life. Today, that would change. The sensor array on the northern continent had stopped working 3 days ago. Without it, they could not complete their survey of the local predator populations. Someone needed to go down and fix it. The mission commander had asked for volunteers, and Kiraveth had raised her hand before she could stop herself. She was beginning to regret that decision. The door behind her opened with a soft hiss, and she turned to see Director Morath enter the observation deck. He was an older Silurian. His scales faded to a pale silver with age. He had led survey missions for longer than Kiraveth had been alive. "The shuttle is prepared," he said. His voice was calm, but she could see the worry in his large eyes. "Are you certain about this?" "The array needs repair," she said. "I am the most qualified technician on the station." "That is true." Morath moved to stand beside her at the window. "But qualification is not the same as preparation. You have never been on a quarantine world. There is a first time for everything." Morath made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sigh. "The human is waiting for you in the shuttle bay." Kiraveth felt her scales tighten slightly. The human. She had almost forgotten about him. Marcus Cole had arrived on the station 2 weeks ago, sent by the Union as a security consultant. The title meant nothing to Kiraveth. Humans were new to the galactic community. They had only made contact with other species a little over a century ago. They were still learning their place among the stars. The Silurians had been part of galactic civilization for 12,000 years. They had seen species rise and fall. They had watched empires grow and crumble. Humans were children in comparison. Curious, energetic children who had somehow managed to spread across dozens of worlds in a remarkably short time. The stories about them were strange and contradictory. Some said humans were weak and fragile, easily broken by the dangers of the galaxy. Others said they were dangerous in ways that were hard to explain. Kiraveth had read the biological data and found nothing impressive. Humans had no natural weapons. No claws, no fangs, no armor. They were not particularly strong or fast. They could not see in the dark or hear beyond normal ranges. They were, by all measurable standards, unremarkable dot. So why did the Union insist on sending one to every high-risk mission? Kiraveth said goodbye to Director Morath and made her way to the shuttle bay. The corridors of the station were quiet. Most of the crew was busy with their own work, analyzing data and monitoring the moon below. She passed a few colleagues who wished her luck with nervous expressions. The shuttle bay was cold and smelled of metal and fuel. A small transport vessel sat in the center of the space, its hull scarred from previous missions. Standing beside it was Marcus Cole. He was shorter than she had expected. Humans were smaller than Silurians in general, but she had somehow imagined he would be bigger. He had brown skin and dark hair cut very short. His face was lined with age, though she could not guess how old he actually was. Human aging was still a mystery to her. He wore simple clothing in dark colors. No armor, no visible weapons. He carried a small pack over one shoulder and nothing else. "You are the xenobiologist," he said. It was not a question. Yes, Kiraveth. She pronounced her name carefully. Humans often had trouble with Silurian sounds. Marcus. He nodded once. "Ready to go?" She looked at him for a moment, waiting for something more. Some explanation of his role, some reassurance about the mission, some indication that he understood the danger they were about to face. He simply looked back at her with calm, steady eyes. "I am ready," she said. They boarded the shuttle in silence. The interior was cramped but functional. Kiraveth took the pilot's seat and began the startup sequence while Marcus strapped himself into one of the passenger seats behind her. She could feel his presence at her back, quiet and still. "Have you been to a quarantine world before?" she asked as the engines hummed to life. "A few. And you survived, obviously." She wanted to ask more questions, but something about his tone discouraged conversation. She focused on the controls instead, guiding the shuttle out of the bay and into the void between the station and the moon. Vera 7 grew larger in the viewscreen. The clouds parted as they descended, revealing the true scale of the forest below. The trees were enormous, their trunks wider than buildings, their canopy so thick that almost no light reached the ground. This was a world where life had grown wild and hungry, where every creature was locked in an endless war for survival. Something screamed in the distance as they broke through the cloud layer. It was a sound unlike anything Kiraveth had ever heard. Long, high, and filled with a hunger that made her scales stand on end. She glanced back at Marcus. His expression had not changed. "Welcome to Vareth 7, he said quietly. The shuttle touched down in a small clearing, and the jungle reached out to embrace them. The heat hit Kiraveth like a wall when she stepped out of the shuttle. Her homeworld was cool and dry, with gentle breezes that carried the scent of flowers. Vareth 7 was the opposite. The air was thick and wet, heavy with moisture that clung to her scales and made it hard to breathe. Strange smells filled her nose. Rotting plants, animal waste, and something else. Something alive and watching. She stood at the base of the shuttle ramp and tried to make sense of what she was seeing. The forest was overwhelming. Trees rose around the clearing like the pillars of some ancient temple, their trunks covered in moss and vines and fungi that glowed with soft blue light. The canopy above blocked most of the sky, letting through only thin beams of golden sunlight that moved slowly across the ground. Sounds came from every direction. Clicks and chirps and rustles and calls. The forest was alive in a way that no place on her homeworld had ever been. Every shadow could hide a predator. Every sound could be a warning or a trap. Kiraveth felt very small. Marcus stepped past her and stood at the edge of the clearing. He was looking at the trees, his head tilted slightly to one side. She noticed that his posture had changed since they landed. On the station, he had seemed relaxed, almost bored. Here, he was different. Not tense exactly, but aware. His eyes moved constantly, tracking sounds, following shadows. "The sensor array is 2 kilometers north," she said, checking her datapad. "We should be able to reach it in about an hour. Less if we move quickly," Marcus said. "More if we have to go around obstacles." He looked at her. "Stay close to me." Do not run unless I tell you to run. Do not make loud noises unless necessary. If I tell you to stop, stop immediately. If I tell you to hide, hide and do not come out until I say. So, you are very serious, she sighed. This is a serious place. They entered the forest. Walking through the jungle was nothing like walking through the corridors of the station. The ground was uneven and covered with roots and fallen branches. Plants grabbed at her legs as she passed. Insects buzzed around her head, drawn by her heat and movement. The air grew even thicker as they moved away from the clearing, and the light grew dimmer. Marcus moved through this chaos like he belonged there. His steps were sure and silent. He ducked under branches without looking, stepped over obstacles without breaking stride. It was as if he could see the forest in a way she could not. "How do you do that?" she asked after the third time she tripped over a root. "Do what?" "Move like that. Like you have done this 1,000 times." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Humans evolved on a planet much like this one," he said finally. "Hot, wet, full of things that wanted to kill us. We spent millions of years learning to survive in places like this before we built our first city. That was a long time ago. Not as long as you might think." He stopped and held up a hand. She froze behind him, her heart beating fast. He listened for a moment, then nodded and continued walking. "The instincts are still there. The knowledge is still there. We just do not need it as often anymore." Kiraveth thought about this. The Silurians had been civilized for so long that they had forgotten what it meant to be wild. The idea of genetic memory, of instincts passed down through countless generations, was fascinating and slightly disturbing. "There is a theory among galactic scholars," she said, "that humans are persistent predators. That your ancestors hunted by following prey until it collapsed from exhaustion." "It is not a theory," Marcus said. "It is history. But that seems so inefficient. Other predators kill with speed and strength. They strike quickly and then rest. And what happens when the prey is faster than the predator? What happens when it escapes?" Marcus glanced back at her. "Humans never stop following. We could not run as fast as our prey, but we could run longer. We could not fight as well as the great predators, but we could track them for days and weeks until they were too tired to fight back. We were never the strongest or the fastest. We were just the ones who never gave up." Kiraveth wanted to argue, to point out that such a strategy seemed impossible. But something in his voice stopped her. He was not boasting or exaggerating. He was simply stating facts. They walked in silence for a while longer. The forest changed around them as they moved deeper. The trees grew larger. The sounds grew stranger. And then Kiraveth saw something that made her stop. There were marks on the trunk of a nearby tree. Deep gouges that cut through the bark and into the wood beneath. They were arranged in groups of 3, each one as long as her forearm. "What made those?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Marcus examined the marks without touching them. "Vareth Render," he said, marking its territory. The name sent a cold wave through Kiraveth's body. She had read about the Renders in her research files. They were the apex predators of Vareth 7, the reason this moon was quarantined. 6-limbed creatures that stood 3 meters tall at the shoulder. Armored hide that could stop most projectile weapons. 4 limbs that ended in bone blades, capable of cutting through metal. They were intelligent, patient, and absolutely deadly. "How old are these marks?" she asked. "Fresh. Maybe a day. Should we go back?" Marcus considered the question. "The render that made these marks has a territory of about 50 square kilometers. We are just passing through. If we are quick and quiet, we should not attract its attention. And if we do attract its attention..." He did not answer. Instead, he started walking again, moving faster now. Kiraveth hurried to keep up, her datapad clutched tightly in her hands. They found more signs as they continued. Broken branches. Disturbed earth. The remains of some creature that had been torn apart and partially eaten, its bones scattered across a small clearing. The render was active in this area. Hunting. Kiraveth wanted to turn back. Every instinct she had was screaming at her to run to the shuttle and fly away from this terrible place. But she had come here to do a job, and she would not return to the station as a failure. Finally, they reached the sensor array, or what was left of it. The equipment had been set up in a small clearing, where the canopy was thin enough to allow communication with the station above. It should have been a simple repair job. Replace a few damaged components, reset the system, and leave. But the sensor array had not simply malfunctioned. It had been destroyed. The metal housing was torn open like paper. The delicate instruments inside were crushed and scattered. Deep gouges marked every surface. The same claw marks they had seen on the trees. Something had found this equipment and attacked it with terrible fury. Why would a render do this? Kiraveth asked. It is not food. It is not a threat. Marcus was not looking at the destroyed array. He was looking at the tree line, at the shadows between the massive trunks, at the darkness that seemed to grow deeper as she watched. It was not trying to destroy the equipment, he said quietly. It was leaving a message. What kind of message? Marcus turned to face her, and for the first time since they had landed, she saw something other than calm in his eyes. We are not alone here, he said. And we need to move, now. The shadow shifted. Something large moved in the darkness between the trees. And a sound reached Kiraveth's ears that she would never forget for as long as she lived. A low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The render had found them. The creature emerged from the shadows like a nightmare-given form. Kiraveth had seen images of Vareth renders in her research files. She had studied their biology, their behavior, their place in the ecosystem of this terrible moon. She had thought she understood what they were. She had been wrong. The images did not capture the reality of the thing. They could not show the way it moved, smooth and silent despite its massive size. They could not convey the intelligence in its 4 yellow eyes as it studied its prey. They could not communicate the sheer wrongness of a creature built entirely for killing. The render stood at the edge of the clearing, its 6 limbs planted firmly on the ground. Its body was covered in thick, dark plates that overlapped like armor. Its head was flat and wide, filled with rows of teeth designed to crush bone. Its 4 limbs were different from the others, longer and thinner, ending in blades of solid bone that gleamed in the dim light. It was 3 meters tall at the shoulder. It weighed more than a transport vehicle, and it was looking directly at them. Kiraveth could not move. Her body had simply stopped responding to her commands. Every muscle was locked in place, frozen by a fear so deep and primal that it bypassed her conscious mind entirely. This was not the fear she had felt when studying dangerous subjects from the safety of the station. This was the fear of prey in the presence of a predator. The fear of death made real and immediate. The render made a sound, a clicking, rattling noise that came from deep in its throat. It was communicating, expressing something. Kiraveth did not know what, and she did not want to know. Do not run. The voice was calm and steady. It took her a moment to realize it was Marcus speaking. He had stepped in front of her, placing his small, soft body between her and the monster that was about to kill them both. What are you doing? She managed to whisper. Stay behind me. Do not run unless I tell you. He was watching the render with the same careful attention he had shown the forest. No fear in his voice. No panic in his movements. Just that strange, focused awareness. You cannot fight that thing. It will kill you in seconds. Maybe. The render took a step forward. The ground shook slightly beneath its weight. It was testing them, she realized, watching how they reacted, deciding how dangerous they were. Marcus did something unexpected. He stepped forward too. The render stopped. Its eyes narrowed slightly, and its head tilted to one side. This was not the behavior it expected from prey. Prey ran, prey froze. Prey did not advance. "What are you doing?" Kiraveth asked again, her voice rising despite her efforts to stay quiet. Marcus did not answer. He was focused entirely on the creature in front of him. She watched as something changed in him. It was not a physical change, not exactly. His body was the same. His size was the same. But something in his presence shifted, grew, became something other than what it had been. On the station, Marcus Cole had been unremarkable. A quiet man with calm eyes and simple clothes. Here, in this clearing, facing this nightmare, he was something else entirely. Something that had been hidden beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The render sensed it too. She could see the uncertainty in its movements as it studied this strange small creature that did not behave like prey. It made another clicking sound, louder this time. A warning. Marcus rolled his shoulders, cracked his neck, breathed out slowly. "When I tell you to run," he said, "run back to the shuttle. Do not stop for anything. Do not look back. I cannot leave you here. You will do exactly that." His voice was firm, but not unkind. "This is what I am here for. This is what humans do." The render decided it had waited long enough. It lowered its head, spread its forelimbs wide, and charged. The speed of the thing was impossible. Something that large should not have been able to move that fast. It crossed the clearing in seconds, its bone blades raised to strike, its mouth open to reveal rows of crushing teeth. The ground shook with each step. The air filled with the sound of its roar. Kiraveth screamed. Marcus moved. She did not see what he did. It was too fast, too fluid, too unexpected. One moment he was standing in front of her. The next moment he was somewhere else, sliding beneath the render's strike like water flowing around a stone. The creature's blades cut through empty air where he had been standing a heartbeat before. The render stumbled. Not much, just a slight break in its rhythm. But it was enough to show that something had gone wrong. It had expected to kill this small, soft creature with a single blow. Instead, it had missed. It turned, searching for its prey. Marcus was behind it now, already moving again. He was not running away. He was circling, staying just outside the reach of those terrible blades, keeping the creature turning and off balance. "Run," he said without looking at her. Now, but Kiraveth could not run. She could not look away. Something was happening here that she did not understand. Something that went against everything she thought. She knew about humans and predators and the way the galaxy worked. The render attacked again. Faster this time, learning from its mistake. Its blades came down in a pattern designed to cut off escape, to trap prey between walls of sharpened bone. Any creature in the galaxy would have died in that moment. Marcus was not any creature. He did not try to escape the pattern. Instead, he moved toward it, into the space between the strikes where the blades could not reach. His hand shot out and struck the inside of the render's forelimb, hitting a point where the armor plates did not quite meet. The creature made a sound she had never heard before. A high, sharp cry of pain. It stumbled backward, one forelimb hanging at an awkward angle. Marcus had damaged something important, something that affected the way the limb moved. He had done it with his bare hands. The render's eyes changed. The predatory confidence was gone, replaced by something else. Something that looked almost like confusion. This was not how hunting worked. Prey did not hurt predators. Prey died. Marcus stood in the center of the clearing, blood on his hands that was not his own. He was breathing hard now, but his eyes were steady, focused, patient. "Run," he said again. "I will not ask a third time." This time, Kiraveth listened. She turned and fled into the forest, leaving behind the sound of the Render's renewed attack and the impossible sight of a single human standing against the deadliest predator on VRATH-7. As she ran, she heard sounds she could not identify, roars and screams and impacts that shook the trees. She heard the Render cry out in pain and then again, its confidence turning to rage, and then to something that might have been fear. She did not look back, but she could not stop wondering what kind of creature she had left behind in that clearing. What kind of monster hid beneath the skin of the quiet man called Marcus Cole. And whether the Render had any idea what it had awakened. Kiraveth ran until her legs burned and her lungs screamed for air. The forest blurred around her as she crashed through undergrowth and stumbled over roots. Branches cut her face and arms. Her feet slipped on wet leaves. She did not care. All that mattered was putting distance between herself and the nightmare in the clearing. But she could not escape the sounds. They followed her through the trees. The roar of the Render, filled with rage and something else she could not name. The impact of massive limbs striking earth and wood. And beneath it all, a steady rhythm of movement, of strikes and dodges and the wet sound of flesh meeting flesh, against her will, against all logic and self-preservation. Kiraveth stopped running. She stood behind a massive tree trunk, her hands pressed against the rough bark, and listened. The sounds continued, but they were changing. The Render's roars were becoming shorter, more desperate. The rhythm of combat was shifting. She should run. She should return to the shuttle and fly away from this terrible place and never look back. That was the smart thing to do. The safe thing to do. Instead, she turned around and crept back toward the clearing. She did not know why. Perhaps it was scientific curiosity, the need to understand what was happening. Perhaps it was concern for the human who had saved her life. Perhaps it was something deeper, some instinct that told her she needed to see this, needed to witness. She found a position behind a fallen tree, close enough to see the clearing but hidden from view. What she saw there would stay with her for the rest of her life. The clearing had become a battlefield. The Render was still alive, still fighting, but it was not the same creature that had emerged from the shadows minutes ago. Its armor was cracked in a dozen places. One of its bone blades was broken, snapped off halfway down its length. Dark blood flowed from wounds on its neck and legs and belly. It moved with a limp now, favoring its left side, its breath coming in ragged gasps. Marcus was still standing. His clothing was torn and soaked with blood. His and the creature's mixed together until it was impossible to tell which was which. Deep cuts marked his arms and torso where the Render's claws had found their mark. He was breathing hard, his face twisted with effort and pain. But he was still standing, still moving, still fighting. The Render lunged at him, slower now but still deadly. Its remaining blades swept through the air in a horizontal arc designed to cut him in half. Marcus dropped beneath it, his body folding in a way that seemed impossible, and came up inside the creature's guard. His fist struck the wound on its neck, driving into damaged flesh. The Render screamed and stumbled backward. Kiraveth watched in horror and fascination as Marcus pressed his advantage. He did not give the creature time to recover. He moved around it in circles, always just out of reach of its strikes, always looking for openings. When he found them, he attacked with brutal efficiency. A strike to a joint, a blow to an eye, his fingers finding the gaps in the armor and tearing at the soft flesh beneath. The Render was larger, stronger, better armed. None of it mattered. Because Marcus Cole simply would not stop. She saw him take a hit that should have killed him. The render's claws raked across his back, tearing through muscle and scraping against bone. Any Silurian would have died instantly. Any creature she knew of would have collapsed from the shock and pain. Marcus stumbled forward, caught himself on his hands, and stood back up. He did not scream, did not cry out. He just kept going, blood flowing down his back, his movements slightly slower but no less determined. The look in his eyes never changed. Patient, focused, relentless. The render tried to retreat. For the first time in its life, the apex predator of Varus 7 tried to run away from a fight. It turned toward the tree line, seeking escape, seeking safety from this impossible creature that refused to die. Marcus did not let it go. He grabbed the broken end of its bone blade, the piece that had snapped off earlier in the fight, and drove it into the back of the render's leg. The creature fell, its damaged limb unable to support its weight. It crashed to the ground with a sound like thunder, and Marcus was on top of it before it could rise. What followed was not a battle. It was an execution. Marcus targeted every weak point, every wound, every vulnerable place on the creature's body. He used its own weapons against it, driving pieces of broken bone into flesh, tearing at armor plates until they came free. The render fought back with desperate fury, but it was too damaged, too exhausted, too shocked by what was happening. Finally, it stopped moving. Marcus stood over the corpse, his chest heaving, his body covered in wounds that would have killed most beings. The render's primary bone blade lay on the ground nearby, torn from its socket during the final moments of the fight. He picked it up, examined it for a moment, and then looked toward the trees, toward Kiraveth. "You were supposed to run," he said. She emerged from her hiding place on shaking legs. The smell of blood and death filled the clearing. The render's body seemed even larger in death than it had in life. A mountain of armor and muscle brought down by something a fraction of its size. "How?" she asked. It was the only word she could manage. Marcus looked down at himself, at the wounds that covered his body. He seemed almost surprised by them, as if he had not noticed them during the fight. "Humans evolved in a hard place," he said. "We were not the biggest or the strongest or the fastest. We were surrounded by predators that could kill us with a single bite. So we learned to be something else. What did you learn to be?" He met her eyes, and she saw something in his gaze that made her scales go cold. Something ancient and patient and utterly without mercy. The thing that predators learn to fear. He swayed slightly, and she realized that he was hurt far worse than he was showing. The blood loss alone should have killed him by now. Whatever kept humans going in situations like this, it was not something she understood. "We need to get you back to the shuttle," she said. "You need medical attention. That would be good." He took a step forward and nearly fell. She caught him, supporting his weight as best she could. He was heavier than he looked, dense with muscle beneath the soft exterior. As they limped toward the forest edge, he paused and looked back at the render's corpse. "That was loud," he said quietly. "Others will come to investigate. We should hurry." Kiraveth did not need to be told twice. They moved through the forest as quickly as his injuries would allow. The journey that had taken them an hour on the way in took twice as long on the way back. But they made it. The shuttle was waiting where they had left it, untouched, its hull gleaming in the dim light that filtered through the canopy. She helped Marcus inside and sealed the door behind them. Only then, surrounded by metal walls and humming engines, did she allow herself to breathe. They were alive, against all odds, against every prediction, against the most dangerous predator on a quarantine world. They were alive because of one human who refused to die. The shuttle rose through the clouds of Varus 7, leaving the jungle and its horrors behind. Kiraveth guided the small craft with trembling hands, her mind still struggling to process what she had witnessed. Beside her, Marcus sat in the passenger seat, his eyes closed and his breathing shallow. She had done what she could for his wounds during the ascent. The shuttle's emergency kit contained bandages, an antiseptic, and painkillers designed for Silurian biology. She had used them anyway, wrapping the deepest cuts and trying to stop the worst of the bleeding. It was not enough. It was nowhere near enough, but Marcus was still alive. "You should be dead," she said quietly. He opened his eyes and looked at her. The calm had returned to his gaze, though she could see the pain lurking beneath it. Probably. Those wounds. The blood loss. Any other species would have died in the first minute of that fight. Humans are stubborn. He shifted in his seat and winced. "We do not like to lose." The station appeared in the view screen, a collection of silver modules against the black of space. Kiraveth requested emergency docking clearance and received it immediately. Word of their situation had already reached the crew. The landing bay was full of people when they arrived. Medical teams rushed forward as soon as the shuttle doors opened, surrounding Marcus with equipment and worried voices. He let them work, answering their questions with short, precise words. He did not complain, did not ask for special treatment, just sat there and let them patch him back together. Kiraveth stood apart from the chaos, watching. Director Morath appeared beside her, his old face creased with concern. What happened down there? He asked. She did not know how to answer. The words seemed inadequate for what she had seen. So she simply told him the truth, starting from the moment they landed and ending with their return to the shuttle. She described the render, described the fight, described watching Marcus Cole tear apart an apex predator with his bare hands. Morath listened in silence. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "I have heard stories," he said finally, "about humans, about what they can do when pushed to their limits. I thought they were exaggerations. They are not." The medical team finished their initial treatment and moved Marcus to the station's medical bay. Kiraveth followed, unable to stay away. She needed to understand, needed answers to the questions that burned in her mind. She found him sitting on a medical bed, his torso wrapped in white bandages that were already showing spots of red. He looked tired but alert, watching the station's doctor study the readings on a medical scanner with obvious confusion. "This is impossible," the doctor was saying. "These wounds should have caused complete system failure. The damage to your musculature alone should have immobilized you. And yet your vital signs are already stabilizing." "Humans heal fast," Marcus said, "especially after a fight. Something about adrenaline and shock response. Our bodies know when to shut down non-essential functions and focus everything on survival. But the pain, the trauma, we feel it." Marcus looked at his bandaged hands. "We just do not let it stop us." The doctor shook his head and left to prepare additional treatment. Kiraveth took his place beside the bed. "I need to understand," she said, "what I saw down there, what you did. No species in the galactic community can do what you did. We have records of thousands of intelligent races, predators and prey and everything between. None of them could have survived that fight, let alone won it." Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering his response. "Do you know why humans spread so quickly through the galaxy?" he asked. "You are adaptable. You breed quickly. You take risks that other species consider foolish. All true. But there is something else." He met her eyes. "Every species in the galaxy evolved to fill a specific role. Predators or prey, hunters or gatherers. You become very good at one thing, and that thing defines you. Humans are different. We are generalists. We are good enough at everything. Good enough is not exceptional. No, but good enough at everything means we can adapt to anything. We are not the fastest, but we can run for hours without stopping. We are not the strongest, but we can use tools and tactics to overcome strength. We are not the toughest, but we can take damage that would kill other species and keep fighting." He paused. "And we have one thing that no other species seems to share." "What?" "We do not know when to quit." Kirava thought about this. She thought about the fight in the clearing, about watching Marcus stand up again and again after strikes that should have ended him. She thought about the look in his eyes when he faced the render. Not anger, not fear, just determination. "The galaxy does not know what you are," she said. "No, they see a young species, barely out of our home system. They see soft bodies and short lifespans and no natural weapons. They think we are weak." He smiled slightly. "We prefer it that way. Why? Because the alternative is having to explain what we really are. And that tends to make people nervous." She thought about the render, the apex predator of a quarantine world, reduced to a bleeding corpse by a single human. She thought about what it would mean if there were billions of humans in the galaxy, all carrying that same capacity for violence beneath their quiet exteriors. "You are right," she said. "It does make people nervous." Later, after Marcus had been treated and was resting in his quarters, Kiraveth returned to her own room. She sat at her desk and began writing her report on the mission dot. It was a difficult document to compose. The facts were simple enough. The sensor array had been destroyed by a render. She and Marcus Cole had been attacked. Marcus had fought the render and killed it. They had returned to the station, but the facts did not capture the truth of what had happened. They did not explain what it meant. She finished the basic report and then added a supplemental section. A recommendation to the Galactic Union based on her observations. It was the kind of thing that could change how humans were viewed throughout known space. She typed the words carefully, knowing their weight. "Based on my direct observation of human capabilities under extreme stress, I recommend that the classification of humanity be revised. Current designation: developing species, minor presence. Recommended designation: potential apex." She stared at the words for a long time before sending the report. Hours later, she found herself on the observation deck, looking down at Vareth 7. The jungle moon turned slowly beneath the station, beautiful and terrible, and full of things that killed. Marcus joined her there, moving carefully because of his wounds. He stood beside her at the window, his reflection ghost-like against the stars. "You sent your report," he said. It was not a question. "Yes." What did it say? She told him. He listened without expression. "Potential apex," he repeated. "I suppose that is accurate. Is it true? Everything you told me about humans?" He considered the question. "Humans are complicated. We have done terrible things throughout our history. Wars, cruelty, destruction. But we have also done remarkable things. Built civilizations, created art, learned to be better than our instincts. And the violence? The thing I saw in that clearing? That is part of us too. The oldest part. We have learned to control it, to channel it, to use it only when necessary. But it never goes away. It is always there, waiting." Kiraveth looked at his reflection. He seemed so ordinary, so unremarkable. She had to remind herself what he had done, what he was capable of, to see him clearly. "The galaxy is not ready for humans," she said. "No," he agreed. "It is not. What will happen when they find out what you really are?" Marcus was quiet for a long time, watching the jungle moon turn beneath them. When he spoke, his voice was soft. "I guess we will find out together." They stood there in silence, two beings from very different worlds, watching the stars wheel overhead. Somewhere out there, the rest of the galaxy went about its business, unaware of what was coming, unaware of what humanity truly was. But Kiraveth knew now. She had seen it with her own eyes. The quiet man beside her carried the weight of his entire species, all their history and potential and terrible capability. And she wondered what the galaxy would look like when everyone else learned the truth. Some questions were better left unanswered. But some truths could not stay hidden forever.